Hello, hope all is well. One second. My name is Muhammad Al Farra, and this is our presentation. It's about the Deepwater Horizon disaster and the BP oil spill in 2010. This was one of the biggest industrial disasters in US history. It was not only an environmental disaster, but also a major corporate governance case, because it raises questions about leadership, safety culture, responsibility, and decision making. In this presentation, we are going to look at whether the disaster was mainly BP's fault or whether it was part of a wider industry problem. We will also look at the flawed decisions, BP's culture, safety failures, and why people on the rig did not challenge risky choices. Next slide. Case overview. To quickly explain the case, the Deepwater Horizon was an offshore oil drilling rig working in the Gulf of Mexico. On April 20, 2010, there was a major explosion on the rig. 11 workers died, and the explosion caused a huge oil spill. This became the largest offshore oil spill in US history. The damage was not only financial, it affected workers, families, coastal communities, the environment, the fishing industry, tourism, BP's reputation, and trust in the oil industry. What makes this case important for corporate governance is that the disaster did not happen because of one simple mistake. It came from a chain of decisions where warning signs were missed or ignored. There was pressure to save time and money, and safety was not treated strongly enough as the main priority. So, from the start, we can see that this is not just a technical accident, it is also a case about leadership, accountability, risk management, and company culture. Next slide. Roadmap. What we will cover. This slide shows the structure of our presentation. We divided the case into the 6 assignment questions. First, I will start with the main debate. Was this mainly a BP failure or was it an industry accident? Then Max will explain the most important flawed decisions made by BP and its partners. After that, Muhammad Dawood will talk about BP's history, culture, and the role of regulation. Paulina will then discuss BP's safety culture and why employees accepted serious risks. Finally, Nicholas will explain why workers and management did not oppose some of the poor choices and sorry and he will close with the main lessons and recommendations. The goal is not just to explain what happened, but to connect the case to corporate governance concepts like responsibility, stakeholder perspective, leadership, safety culture, and accountability. Slide number 4. This is my question. Question 1, BP failure or industry accident? For question 1, my position is that this disaster was mainly a BP failure, but it also exposed a wider industry problem. I do not think that it is fair to describe it as only an unavoidable industry accident. Of course, offshore drilling is risky. There are technical dangers, high costs, and a lot of pressure, but in this case, the disaster was not just bad luck, it was linked to preventable decisions, weak oversight, and poor risk management. BP was the lead operator, so it had the biggest responsibility. It had the power to slow things down, question unsafe choices, and make sure safety came before cost or speed. But the case shows that there was too much pressure around time, money, and finishing the job. That is why I see this as a corporate governance failure, because leadership did not control risk properly. At the same time, BP was not the only company involved. Transocean operated the rig, and Halliburton was also involved in important work. So the disaster also shows problems in the wider oil industry, where risky decisions can become normal because delays are expensive and everyone wants to avoid extra costs. From a stakeholder perspective, the people affected were not only BP shareholders, the workers, their families, local communities, the environment, regulators, and the public were all affected. This is why companies in dangerous industries need to think beyond profit and short term performance. So, my final answer is Deepwater Horizon was mainly a BP failure, but it happened inside a wider industry culture that accepted too much risk. This leads into the next section, where Max will explain the specific flawed decisions that made the disaster possible. Thank you, Professor, for your time.
Good afternoon, Professor. It's Maxime, and I'll be speaking more about question two here. I'm specifically going to be discussing what I believe were the most significant flawed decisions that led to the disaster, specifically the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Now, the first point is that it wasn't just caused by a single mistake. Instead, it happened because of a series of decisions, right? That gradually reduced the margin of safety and increased the likelihood of failure, right? Now, one of the most important decisions involved was the cementing process, right? And there were concerns about whether the cement barrier would properly seal the well, yet those concerns were not treated with enough caution. Now, in a high risk industry, such as offshore drilling, uncertainty should trigger additional testing and verification, and not just assumptions, right? Now, the second major issue was the negative pressure test. This test produced abnormal results that suggested the well might not be secure. However, instead of stopping operations and investigating further, the results were interpreted in a way that allowed work to continue. Right? Now, looking back, this was a critical missed opportunity to prevent the disaster. Another problem was the failure of multiple well control barriers. Corporate governance relies on layers of protection. If one control fails, another should be there to stop the risk from escalating. Now, in this case, several safeguards either failed or were not properly verified before operations moved forward. And we also saw poor conditions and coordination between PV, Tranocean, and Halliburton. Now, effective governance requires challenge, it requires communication and accountability between partners. Instead, concerns were not challenged strongly enough and important warnings were not escalated. Now, finally, cost and time pressure influenced decision making. The project was already behind schedule and it was already over budget, and creating pressure to complete operations quickly. While no company wants delays, governance exists precisely to ensure that financial objectives never outweigh safety considerations. From a corporate governance perspective, the key lesson is that these were not only operational failures, um, rather they were governance failures. Because strong governance should create systems that force decision makers to pause when risk evidence is unclear, rather than allowing production pressure to drive the final decision. Right? Um, that's it from my slide. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Max. And now, after looking at the flawed operational decisions, I will explain how BP's organizational culture and the regulatory environment shaped those decisions. The main point is that the disaster was not caused only by technical mistakes. The way people behaved on the rig was influenced by what BP considered normal and acceptable. First, BP's history and internal culture created strong pressure to improve performance, control costs, and maintain operational efficiency. And this pressure became particularly important because BP had already faced previous incidents and accidents and public criticism. Although the company had safety policies, day-to-day decisions were often influenced by time, cost, and production targets. Over time, this created a culture of confidence where employees and managers became more willing to rationalize warning signs instead of treating them as reasons to stop operations. In other words, because risky decisions had previously been taken without causing a major disaster, those decisions gradually began to appear normal, and this is known as the normalization of risk. However, BP's internal culture was not only uh, it wasn't the only issue. The political and regulatory environment also played an important role. Regulators did not provide a strong enough independent challenge to BP and other companies involved. Offshore drilling is highly technical, which made effective supervision difficult. At the same time, the relationship between regulators and the oil industry was often too cooperative, and this weakened accountability because companies were not being challenged strongly enough when safety evidence was unclear. This connects directly to the course concept of corporate governance. And corporate governance is about the direction, control, and accountability. And the board, senior managers, and regulators should create systems that challenge risky decisions before they lead to crisis. And in the Deepwater Horizon case, these systems failed, and the BP's culture influenced what employees considered normal, while weak regulation failed to correct uh, or reset that norm. So the key takeaway is that culture told the people which risks were acceptable, and regulation failed to challenge that belief. And yeah, so now I will pass to Paulina, who will explain more specifically where BP's safety culture was lacking. Thank you.
This case shows a balance between performance and conformance. BP focused on productivity, cost, and drilling success, but governance should also ensure safety, control, and accountability. It also shows why stakeholders matter, because the disaster affected workers, families of the workers, communities, the environment, as well as the shareholders. To conclude, the Deepwater Horizon was a preventable governance failure. BP had the strongest responsibility, but weak safety culture, poor decisions, and weak challenge from partners and regulators made this disaster possible. The key lesson is that safety must be managed before the crisis happens, and not only afterwards. These are the main sources we used for this presentation. AI was used for the help of structure and wording, but the final understanding and presentation responsibility stays with the group. So why did people fail to pose poor choices? People staying silent did not always mean they agreed. It could also mean fear, hierarchy, uncertainty, or lack of confidence to challenge senior decisions. On the rig, the technical warning signs were unclear, and workers may have assumed managers had better information. From governance view, BP failed to create a culture where speaking up and stopping work felt normal and safe, which basically correlated to they built a system where accountability flows upwards, not only orders flowing downwards. So stronger governance would mean board level safety oversight, as well as independent checks for risky decisions and real stop work authority. And initiatives that reward safety and not only speed or cost savings. Regulators also need to be independent and strong enough to challenge the companies because of the companies' sizes and their resources they have.